Jaws 2, Part 1, Chapter 1. A flattened, blood-red sun rose dead ahead. The White Hatteras powerboat, Miscarriage out of Sag Harbor, slithered around Montauk Point. She emerged from Long Island Sound and rose to the swell of open ocean. The two half-suited scuba divers high on her flying bridge took wider stances. The taller of the two, an obstetrician from Astoria General on Long Island, flicked off the running lights. The shorter was a Manhattan attorney for Union Carbide. The two had little in common except an interest in diving, diminishing as they aged, and a partnership in the boat. They almost never met except on summer weekends. Years ago, the doctor had decided that his little partner was a Jewish pinko and simply accepted it. The lawyer sensed bigotry but ignored it. Friends or not, each had some $30,000 in the boat, and there was the security of a known companion. Each was sure that the other was a steadier diver than himself. Every year, the physician dreaded the first few scallop dives of spring. Equipment always felt strange at first. The water would be cold and cloudy, and here, off Amity Township, lurked a ghost. The beast was dead. The doctor had all but forgotten the stories in the Long Island press. The Manhattan lawyer seldom thought of the pictures in the time, but a secret halftone specter swam in the subconscious of each. The doctor was suddenly cold. He glabbed at G recording fathometer tracing the depth. They were searching for a clump of bottom rocks they knew, but the graph on the instrument was still flat as the trace of a terminal patient in intensive care. The doctor pictured mud below and silt. He shivered and swung down the flying bridge ladder. He tugged his neoprene upper suit from behind a tank rack in the cockpit and squirmed into it. He had put on weight. Even after he smoothed it on, he was still shivering. He stepped into the cabin. He had not got his sea legs yet. Crossing to the stainless galley stove behind the service bar, he lurched into a rattan bar stool and knocked it over. He swore softly and set it up. Then, he moved behind the counter and took 2 cups from a rack. He poured a double slug of Old Grandad into his cup and a single into his partner's, then filled the cups with coffee from the stove. He started out, remembered that it was impossible to carry 2 cups up the ladder to the flying bridge, and sat down at the lower steering station to sip the stronger one below. The groundswell, which was making him queasy, told him that they were paralleling the beach too closely offshore. He gazed for a moment, through binoculars, out the starboard window. The gray summer cottages of Napeague, Amagansett, East Hampton, and Sagaponack slumbered less than half a mile away. In them, early tenants would be awakening to the gut growl of the boat's twin Chryslers. A child poked along the tide flats, teased to run by a huge woolly dog. The doctor found a strange comfort in the cottages, and decided after all not to ask his partner to move further out. The sound of the engines suddenly diminished to a quiet chortle. Obviously, the first trace of the fathometer had sprung to life. The doctor slipped down from the lower helmsman's seat. He hesitated, then slugged down the drink he had intended for the man topside. He went forward and dangled a stainless Danforth anchor until he felt the bottom some 30 feet below. As his partner backed slowly, he paid off chain and line. Finally, he snubbed the line on a bow cleat and signaled his partner that the hook was properly set. Sidling aft along the narrow deck outboard of the cabin, he glanced at the shoreline. All the shoulder-to-shoulder communities lining Long Island dunes had always looked the same to him, but he was pretty sure he had anchored on the doorstep of Amity. The Great White swam south 20 feet below the surface, leaving Block Island to her right. She came left, dead on course for Montauk Point. She was gravid with young in both uteri, and her hunger was overwhelming. She had fed last night off Nantucket on a school of cod, and all night long she had held course southwest along the coast of Rhode Island. She had swept into Newport Bay and found nothing, banked gracefully like a cargo plane, and resumed her track south. Her 6-foot-high tail propelled her bulk with stiff, purposeful power. Before her, an invisible cone of fear swept the sea clean, from bottom to surface. For a full mile ahead, the ocean was emptying of life. Seals, porpoises, whales, squid all fled. All had sensors, electromagnetic, oral, vibratory, or psychic, which were heralding her coming. As she passed, the Atlantic refilled in her wake. Man would have ignored such sensors, if he still had them, in favor of intelligence. But man was not her normal prey. To overcome the clairvoyance of her quarry, she was ordinarily swifter than whatever animal she pursued. Her food included almost any creature of worthwhile size that swam, floated, or crawled in the ocean. But she had become so large, near term, that her speed was down. She grew more ravenous with every mile that passed. Halfway down the anchor line, the doctor paused. His panting, amplified in his regulator, was ear-splitting. He was sure his partner, descending in a green flowering of bubbles 10 feet below him, could hear every gasp. Clinging to the half-inch rope, he tried to relax. Hyperventilation in the first dive was normal. But if he could not slow his breathing, he would be out of air and forced to surface in 10 or 15 minutes. There was pride involved. Despite his size and greater metabolic requirements, his tank always outlasted the smaller man's. He could not understand the apprehension that was making him pant. When his respiration eased, his ears began to ache. He jammed his mask tightly against his face, wheezed air through his nose, and cleared his eustachian tubes. He resumed his descent. Visibility was better than he had expected, 15 feet or more. But he had already lost his partner. When he reached the bottom, he followed the anchor line along the sand until it became chain. 15 feet further, he found the lawyer in a cloud of silt, trying to bury the Danforth against the outgoing tide. He assisted in this, and finally they had the anchor flukes buried. The lawyer glanced at his wrist compass, jerked his thumb toward the north, and began to swim back along the track they had taken, searching for the clump of rocks. The doctor followed, cruising 5 feet above the bottom and off his partner's left hip. He began to feel at home again. His heart had stopped hammering. His 3-shot breakfast was working through his system, calming him wonderfully. Swimming along, he glanced at his partner and found himself smiling. The little attorney was burdened with all the equipment that money could buy. His mask was prescription ground so that he needed no glasses. He wore a pressure-equalizing vest. This was its maiden voyage, and he kept climbing and descending as he tried to regulate it. On the lawyer's left wrist was the compass, and on his right an underwater watch to give him bottom time. From his neck dangled a Nikonos underwater camera. They had used it last year and found the light below too weak, so now it had a strobe. Strapped to the lawyer's left calf was a buck diving knife. On his right leg was an aluminum scallop iron for their prey. He looked, thought the doctor, like Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, hiding from the festivities at the bottom of his parents' swimming pool. Dawn had begun to shimmer faintly down to her as she passed Montauk. Her eyes were black, flat, unblinking, giving her an air of profound wisdom. Her pupils were mirror-polished inside, so she had excellent vision, even in this dim light. But she continued to navigate as before, blindly and mindlessly as a computer would, using the electroreceptor ampullae which covered her head to sense the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field. 2 years before, not far from here, she had been hit by a male not much smaller than she. Grasping her dorsal in his jaws, he had somehow borne her, despite her superior strength, to the muddy bottom. There, passive and supine, she had received both of his yard-long salami-shaped claspers into her twin vents. Her back, though her skin was composed of thousands of tiny teeth itself, was still scarred from his grip. Even before her pregnancy, she had outweighed her passing mate, and any creature in the seas except for some cetaceans and her own harmless relatives, the basking and whale shark. At 30 feet and almost 2 tons, she was longer than a killer whale and heavier by half. Now, near term, her girth was enormous. In her left uterus squirmed 3 young. In her right lived 5, 3 females and 2 males. The smallest was a little over 3 feet long and weighed only 22 pounds, He was, nevertheless, a fully functional being. He had survived in utero for almost 2 years, eating thousands of unfertilized eggs, and with his remaining brother and sisters, some 30 weaker siblings. He himself was not out of danger yet, especially from his sisters, who were uniformly larger than males. If the mother hunted successfully for the next few weeks, her egg production would satisfy his siblings and he would probably live. If he successfully fought off his sisters, he would be born at the top of the oceanic feeding triangle. Already he feared no kind but his own. The lawyer slowed, and the doctor almost overran him. His partner was pointing to the left. The doctor turned his head. He saw a shape tinged darker green than the pale water through which they swam. It was not the clump of rocks they had dived last year. It was abrupt, angular, man-made. Excitedly, his partner swam toward it. The doctor followed. The stern of a wrecked fishing boat, bigger and heavier than their own, loomed from the murk. Green shards of light played on her barnacle-covered transom. She was an immensely rugged old craft. The growth on her twisted planks told them that she had been here for some time. The doctor spotted a heavy hawser lying along the sand. It led below the half-buried quarter of the hulk. He pulled himself along it, jerked at the line, could not move it. He rounded the stern to see where it led on the other side. The lawyer porpoised along beside him, trying to adjust his buoyancy. The doctor found the other end of the rope, secured to it by a giant shackle. A 55-gallon iron drum bumped restlessly against the hull. It was crushed and dented, but the remains of yellow paint showed that it had once been meant as a float. The current swept it suddenly against the hulk with a mournful clang. The old granddad left the doctor's veins in a rush. He was very cold. The lawyer had swum aft. He was rubbing at the seagrass whiskers growing on the stern. He suddenly yanked his scallop iron from its scabbard and chiseled loose a half-dozen barnacles, loosening a mist of mud. When the water cleared, the doctor could read, in faint orange letters, the name, Orca, home port, Narragansett. The name courted some deep memory. He looked at his partner. Behind the lawyer's faceplate, enlarged by the prescription lenses, he saw his companion's gray eyes crinkle in thought. Suddenly, the lawyer jammed a fist into a palm, remembering something. Excitedly, he began to grunt, their signal for something out of the ordinary. He waved toward the orange letters. Then he took both hands, fingers clawed like teeth, and swept them through the motion of huge jaws closing. He pointed again at the name on the shattered stern. The doctor understood. The half-forgotten news story of a shark fisherman, a Tanktown police chief, and some oceanographic expert or other, read long ago in the Long Island press, surfaced in his mind. He discovered that he did not like it here. They were after scallop, not wrecks, and anything of souvenir value must have been salvaged by other divers long ago. He found, in fact, that he was no longer even interested in the scallops. His breath was rasping again and his heart hammering, and he felt the first indications of low tank pressure. He pointed to the surface, but his companion shook his head, tapped the camera, and drew him to a position by the stern. He planted him under the overhang of the stern boards. Then the lawyer backed off, camera to faceplate. The doctor pointed obediently at the letters on the transom, smiling idiotically around his mouthpiece. His partner, trying to stand erect on the bottom, seemed to take forever. The doctor had suddenly to urinate. The strange apprehension he had felt all morning gripped his bladder and squeezed it tight. When he could wait no longer, he simply voided into his wetsuit pants. The warmth of it was good along his side, but did not help the chill in his gut. He heard the clunk of the steel barrel against the hulk, and felt it through his glove where he held to the plank. He could hear his own hoarse gasping, and his companion's breath as well. The strobe light fired, turning everything momentarily white. All at once he heard a sound like a subway train, fast approaching from his rear. His partner, dancing on sand as he tried to balance in the current, wound his camera, then stopped. He stared at something approaching from above. The doctor, startled, began to turn but instinctively hunkered down instead, clinging to a broken plank. His eyes were riveted on his companion. A great bubble soared from his partner's mouth. The lawyer threw up an arm to protect himself. The camera strap fouled and the strobe fired again, illuminating everything and making the doctor feel naked. The green surface light faded. An enormous bulk, descending like a gliding jet, swept by, a foot above the doctor's head, blotting out the dancing sunlight. It seemed to pass forever. The last of the shape became a tail, towering taller than himself. It swished once, almost sweeping him loose and blotting his view of his partner in a cloud of bottom silt and mud. There was silence. The barrel clanged. The doctor clung to the splintered plank, peering into the settling murk. He could hear only his own tortured breathing. He was terrified at the loudness of it, and of his bubbles, beckoning whatever it was back to the spot. But he could not quiet the panting, and he could not budge from the stern. One of his partner's diving fins bounced past, heading to sea on the tidal current. He could have reached out and touched it. He made no move. It was fear that finally drove him from shelter. He became more frightened of dying where he was with an empty tank than of discovery. Tentatively, he moved a few feet from the stern and waited. Nothing happened. In a burst of courage, he kicked off. He remembered to rise no faster than his bubbles, remembered to kick slowly and steadily without panic, for whatever it was would be attuned to panic, remembered, as the depths turned from dark green to shimmering jade, to breathe, and breathe again, so that the expanding air in his lungs would not burst them, though the noise of his breathing terrified him. He remembered when he surfaced into golden sunlight to shift his mouth from regulator to snorkel. He remembered to drop his weight belt for easier swimming. And he remembered, for a while, to kick with a careful pedaling motion so as not to splash the surface with his round. He eased his head from the water. The Hatteras slapped at anchor hardly 100 feet away. His fear diminished. A rush of joy that it was he who had survived. A flow of ecstasy, almost sexual, warmed his veins. Carefully, he slithered toward the boat. He hardly broke the water. Once he stopped and glided, gazing straight down. He saw nothing but shafts of emerald light lancing the depths below. He raised his head. 1,000 yards beyond the boat slept the houses by the dunes. 2 tiny figures raced along the tide line. It seemed an eternity since he had seen them from the cabin, but it was the same child. He shivered suddenly. Deep in his soul, he felt another onrush of terror. He quickened the beat of his fins. One of them plopped loudly, and then the other, but he had less than 30 feet to go. He could no longer stand the dragging pace. With 20 feet to go, he was sprinting, thrashing recklessly, breathing in enormous, chest-searing gulps. All at once, 10 feet from the boat, he felt a bump and a firm, decisive grasp on his left femur, some 3 inches above his knee. It was surprising, but not at all violent. His first thought was that his partner had somehow survived, caught up with him from below, and plucked his thigh for attention. He dipped his mask, looking down. He was amazed to see half a human leg, swathed in neoprene, tumbling into the depths. He observed that, though fully detached from the upper femur at the suprapatellar bursa, it exhibited little bleeding from its own portion of the femoral artery, though a cloud of blood from somewhere else was forming quickly. Whoever had amputated had performed neatly. The skin along the incision was scalpel clean. He was filled with sudden lassitude. He floated, fascinated by the legs spinning into the depths. He had the sense of something vast moving below the limb, out of his zone of visibility, but he was strangely giddy and somehow did not care. The leg rose as if bumped and disappeared. His left side was weak. He wondered if he had had a heart attack or even a stroke. He was getting too old to dive. He might even sell his share in the boat. He began feebly to swim again. He heard the faint subway roar. He did not care. He stopped moving. He was too tired to fight his sleepiness, though the boat was only 3 strokes away. He would doze a while like a basking seal and swim the last few feet later. Then he was borne aloft. He sensed that his ribs, lungs, spleen, kidneys, bowels, duodenum were being squeezed firmly together as if in a giant hydraulic press. He felt no pain at all.